Okie dokie.
I don't see it.
I got it. I got it. Good cup. Oh, okay. Well, that'll do it every time.
Can you tell from the magic of all your screens if anyone is logged into the stream?
Yeah, there's one person there, although it may be me right now. And by the way, on the live stream, it goes to several different places, including YouTube. And honestly,
Wow.
if we get 20 people watching live, that's fine. We tend to get over 2,000 downloads of the show afterwards.
Right. So people use it like a podcast.
Yeah. We produce it live because, frankly, Suncast makes it easy to do so. It's easier to do it live than to record it and post it. We do both at the same time. It's live and posted. Let's see.
Pen.
Let me see.
My email is open on my desk. There it is. What? Yeah, I want to open a different browser window. I have two screens. One of them is down in front of me. I would love to open this on my little screen. So maybe I can just cut and paste here. Oh, there we go. Oh, so those are two big buttons.
Yeah, you can pop that tab out if you want to, and just make it really small.
Oh no,
does that make sense?
I can't miss it.
Almost done sharing this. I attached Ken Tankel's name to a few of these. That way the authorities will know where to find him.
The authorities. It's going to be the loudness police.
That's right, the loudness police. That's good. Okay. Suncast, you ready? All righty. Let's see what a wide shot on me looks like. Make sure I don't have too much glare on my TWiRT sign, which I don't. That's good. It's a minute after the top of the hour in the Central Time Zone and everywhere else too. Just different hours. All right, so we'll start the show here. Episode 622. By the way, welcome in if you're watching the live stream. Glad you're here. We will have a reposting of this podcast without this part within a day or so, and you can share it with your friends, and that'd be great. We'll start our show, episode 622 of This Week in Radio Tech. We'll do that in 3, 2. Hey, welcome into This Week in Radio Tech, the show where we talk about everything from the microphone to that light bulb at the top of the tower. And today's subject is actually a little bit, kind of a sidebar. It's a really important sidebar. It's a whole nother article. Maybe it's a whole different book. We'll tell you about that in just a minute. Welcome in. I'm Kirk Harnack, the host of the show, and this is our 622nd episode of This Week in Radio Tech. I'm here in my Nashville office. It's the Nashville studio, the Telos Alliance studio, and it's one of those days where a typical December day here in Nashville, Tennessee. It is rainy. It is chilly. It's gray. It's darn near dark outside. It's no fun. I got out in it earlier today, took two of my grandkids over to see my dad, and we had a lovely time, but man, it's just nasty out there. So we're going to try to make it bright and cheery inside. All right. Chris Tarr is not joining us today. He's still sick, and I just hope he gets better. Pray for him. Send him good thoughts. He's suffering from some bronchitis, and I thought he'd be over it, but apparently doctor told him, you stay in bed and don't even think about talking to Kirk Harnack. So Chris, hope you get better, but that's okay. My guest has a personality that's as big as me and Chris put together. It's Ken Tankel. Ken, welcome into the show. Good to see you, sir.
That's quite an introduction. Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Good to see you. Tell us who is Ken? What's that?
I said, it's nice to be here again. I did one of these a while ago, long
Yeah.
time ago. So it's nice to be back.
Well, the top, thank you, and thank you for joining us on short notice. I think we talked about this a week or 10 days ago. Let's preview the topic, and then we're going to take a real quick break to hear from one of our friends. But you are a real guru and expert in TV audio, not only the theory but in the practicalities of TV audio. And a lot of folks notice that even with the Calm Act, that's supposed to make TV programs and commercials about the same volume, it's not always working. And kind of give us a little tease about we're going to hear about the problems of TV audio and what may be out there available to help make those problems better, and maybe some of your personal ideas on how that could get accomplished. So what are we going to learn today, Ken?
Well, I hope that we're going to learn that having the correct loudness doesn't mean that you can hear any dialogue. And I suppose as a
What?
corollary, TV
Mm-hmm.
is not radio.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Correct volume still means you may not hear the dialogue. That's interesting because I hear that complaint from people.
Right. So we're going to define what correct with quotations. What does correct audio mean to a TV broadcaster, and why is there something that would be correct or not correct, and why having it correct does not mean that everybody hears the dialogue.
And just because you're good at radio audio processing does not imply that you'd be good at TV audio processing, right?
Well, there's there's a huge difference. For the most, and this I'm going to paint with really broad brushstrokes, so nobody get really upset if you're not in the middle of the line that I paint. But essentially, for a long time, radio broadcasters want you to know what radio station you're listening to within a second or two of turning it on. You go across the dial or push the button, and the sound of the person talking or the sound of the music should give you an idea immediately whether you're on your favorite station or not. And much time and money has been spent trying to get each of the you tell me, Kurt, 1,700 and plus FMs and 1,500 plus AMs for them to be unique. In TV, the last thing that you would say is, I recognize the TV station by the sound of the audio. The goal, right? It's simple, but it's something that very much radio engineers can understand. You're going from a signature sound to the sound that, and again, don't get excited if I use the word natural sound, but in TV they call it nat sound. So nat sound is the natural sound that you are hearing around whoever's speaking. And what they want to do is to have people sound like who they are. They want everything to sound like it is.
We got a lot of ground to cover.
Yep.
Yeah. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we're going to do it. We're going to do it as quickly as we can. Ken has some graphics that was going to help make his points about these things, and we're going to turn them loose on you and me in just a minute. Hey, we're brought to you in part by Nautel, and Nautel transmitter company. They make amazing transmitters, both AM and FM, and some shortwave ones too. And they are still doing their Transmission Talk Tuesday roundtable discussions, and that means it's not a webinar. Although the website is nautel.com/webinars, but the Transmission Talk Tuesdays are not webinars. They are roundtable discussions. And if you go to nautel.com/webinars, you can click on Transmission Talk Tuesday discussions. And they've got two of them coming up in this month. The next one is December 13th, so that is just a few days from today. It's on Tuesday, December 13th. It's Site Stories. So stories of transmitter sites, good and bad. I'm sure we're going to learn something, learn what to do and learn what not to do during Site Stories. And then December 20th, a week later, on Tuesday, December 20th, the week before Christmas, it's the holiday season recap, and it's going to be fun. I'm quite sure that Jeff Welton will be wearing something festive, maybe a sweater, maybe a Santa hat, and you can join along and tell some stories and have some eggnog or hot chocolate or, whatever turns you on. But we really appreciate Nautel doing this. Nautel does so much for our industry. There's a whole resources area on there with videos and white papers and instruction manuals, how to this and how to that, and of course a backlog of the Transmission Talk Tuesday show. So if there's a topic that you want to go back and cover, typically on Transmission Talk Tuesday, they will get one or two subject matter experts to be the guests on the show, but it's not it's not 1 hour of that expert talking. It's Jeff and that expert talking, and then sometimes there are expert guests in the audience, and then he opens it up for you to ask questions. So I really appreciate Nautel taking the time, the money, and the effort to help our industry, to help engineers like me, to learn about not only their products but about the best practices, and not just transmitters either. Like this week, it's Site Stories coming up on the just a few days away. What was that? The 12th, the 13th, whatever Tuesday is. So go to nautel.com/webinars and sign up. When you click register, easy peasy, and they will send you an email the day before and an hour before to remind you that it's coming up. Also, there's an easy link to add the Transmission Talk Tuesday to your calendar, no matter if you're using Outlook or Google Calendar. It's really easy to add that. Hey, thanks a lot, Nautel, at nautel.com/webinars for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. Hey, it's Kirk Harnack. Chris Tarr is laying low today. Let's hope he's getting better. And Ken Tankel is my guest. Oh, full disclosure, Ken is a colleague of mine at the Telos Alliance. We our checks are both signed by the same people, but Ken works in a different area than I do. He and I get to talk just when, and one fact, we talked just yesterday. We had a client that's not in radio or TV asking about some upmixing, and I sent that client, that prospect, I should say, over to Ken. Ken got him, told him, yes, we can solve that problem. And now we're on our way to them picking up some surround sound audio processing. So Ken, let me not hold you up any farther. I'd kind of like to get a lesson in what you want to tell us about.
Well, okay. You asked or started to ask before who I am, and I avoided the question. But I was a radio engineer, a station chief engineer. I worked in television engineering. I have SBE certifications as a senior television engineer and a senior radio engineer, and I'm a lifetime certified CPBE. So I have worked in the industry and spent the first half of my career in radio. If at this point, I'm a little confused as to what radio engineers know versus what television engineers know. If I go off into the weeds of TV stuff and you don't think that this is commonly understood in radio, just bring me right back, Kurt. So really, really briefly, what brought this up is internally the Telos Alliance, between the radio processing people and the TV processing people. There are always discussions about the meanings of loudness and what's good processing. Good processing being, what are the tools that people need? What are the tools in radio? What are the tools in TV? Where are they the same? Where are they different? Where can we cross over and use tools in both places? And one of our colleagues came up with a article they shared from the Wall Street Journal, I think, that was talking about volume, about complaints, particularly on TV, specifically on TV, about people not being able to hear dialogue. And there was a discussion of when that occurred, and that people are complaining about it pretty widely. That it is certainly a known issue among program providers. And Kurt pointed out that, well, there is a commercial. It's actually called the COM Act, and COM is I may not even remember what all the letters were. And Kurt, you may have to help me here, but it is the Commercial Audio Loudness Mitigation Act.
Ah,
CALM. I think that Congress worked really hard on coming up with a clever acronym for that. And that was 2011. So in 2011, there was actually a mandate from Congress to the FCC to control the loudness of commercials in TV broadcasting. And for those of you who don't remember, 2011 is when we all switched from analog television broadcasting to digital broadcasting. And one of the things that made commercial loudness an issue is that we went from what we all know, FM analog transmitters, that TV audio is sent by the same mechanism that radio, over the air radio, um, has been sent for the last 50 years or more, FM radio. I'm setting ubiquity digital radio aside just for a moment. But when
mhm,
we're looking at uh, delivery over the air, TV and radio, when TV was analog and the continuing analog output of FM radio stations, that broadcasting is the same. And we all know there was a peak, an artificial peak set on how loud you could be. And that is the limit of when your frequency modulation would interfere from one station to the next station on the dial. And so
right.
there was an absolute limit, and all the processing in radio was aimed at not exceeding that limit. Uh, and I think that everybody in radio has an understanding that modulation levels have to be maintained.
And hey, it's probably worthwhile to point out a couple other reasons, for maintaining modulation level with analog FM, and that is once the FCC said, "Hey, here's the deviation we're going to do," receiver manufacturers designed their receivers such that a lot more modulation than that would clip inside the receiver. And there were
Well,
skirts,
wait,
so to speak, frequency, bandpass skirts inside receivers. So if you modulate a lot, maybe your transmitter can do that, maybe your exciter can do that, maybe your antenna can handle a pretty wide swath, but a lot of receivers go, nope, you're not getting through, or you're going to be curtailed, and that induces distortion. So receiver induced distortion. The other reason then is that and also why we have the pre-emphasis curve with FM was to overcome noise. So you want to at least be loud enough to overcome the system noise from end to end, including the propagation path and the receiver. But it seems like for decades, and I'll just jump to for decades, FM processing and AM processing too has been predicated on let's make it as loud as we can as long as it doesn't sound bad. And now, a talk station, an AM talk station would have that philosophy too. An FM talk station might not. An NPR station might not. But most music stations would be different levels of as loud as we can without making it sound bad. And that without making it sound bad, that threshold might certainly be different whether you're, an easy listening station or a listen at work station or a heavy metal rock station. You'd have different thresholds for, okay, that's starting to sound bad. But we had that goal because it was analog and you wanted to, be loud, jump off the dial and overcome the noise. But as we've moved to digital, as you pointed out with HD, HD has a much less of a noise floor problem, and
yeah, absolutely.
filling up more bits with audio doesn't make it go any farther. And the same thing for TV audio. We didn't need. There's no reason to push the limit on deviation because it was digital. And I'm sorry if I interrupted your story, but I wanted to
No,
kind of
no, but
clear
this
that up
is
as to why we are where we are.
yes, and you're looking now from a system point of view. And if I had to describe what I do, I would say I'm a systems engineer because I am constantly looking at what the end to end signal travel is. How do we get it from someone who produces a program to a person that receives and basically listens to that program, subscribes to that program, becomes a listener of that radio station or a viewer of that TV station or that program. And you have to look at that from end to end. And so all the decisions you make at any point have carryover decisions that affect every other
Mm-hmm.
point. So if you have to limit your deviation in order to protect stations that are adjacent to you on the dial, then the receiver manufacturer is not going to design a receiver that has the capability of being louder, of detecting a deviation that's wider than it should be, because that only adds cost. And so every step down the line, affects
Mhm.
every other step. In radio, we still have the sorry, again, broad brushstroke. Everybody with a radio station is on FM or AM. Everybody's hitting a transmitter. Everybody
Mhm.
is processing with that maximum level in mind. And your headroom, you just push, right? Compressors, limiters, you just push the level into your compressor and limiting so that you spend as much time as possible close to that limit. That increases your loudness, it decreases your noise. As technology over the last 70 years has gotten better and better and better, capabilities for processing have gotten better and better and better. One thing that you do not typically have a problem with on radio is people not hearing what you're saying.
Mhm.
If it's a
Mhm.
talk station, you can push that talk up and get a very small average to peak ratio. And
Mhm.
so the average levels are very good. TV
Hey,
goes from
mhm.
F. Yeah,
I'm sorry. I've got a quick question. I was going to say because in radio, typically it's an intimate experience. The announcer's right here. He's talking to you like this. He's close to the microphone, and we have this intimate experience where we don't have a lot of background noise. But in TV, we have drama, we have background noise, we have movies with sound effects. But you know what we used to have on radio years ago? We had drama on radio,
of
and there were
course.
sound effects added, and yet the vocals. I mean, listen to an old show like Lum and Abner or The Great Gildersleeve, and you'll clearly hear the dialogue. No problem at all, even with the audio processing we had back in the 1940s and early 1950s. It wasn't a problem to hear the dialogue, and yet today, as we're moving to this in this conversation, we many people have problem hearing the dialogue on television.
On television. So why is that? Uh, there are a couple of reasons, and what I said at the very beginning of the show about the average level being consistent does not mean that the dialogue levels are consistent. And that's what I want to talk about without getting into the details of the COM Act and without getting into the details of processing, because we could spend show after show after show talking about different aspects of processing. I just want to call your attention to a couple of things that in radio, I believe, are just completely taken for granted, and in TV are not at all taken for granted. And so I
Gotcha.
do have a couple of diagrams. They're a little crude, but I think they do the job. I'm wondering if we can bring one of those up. Right.
Yeah, let's go.
We'll even take a look. So the first one of those is the basics. Why do we say that there's anything like correct level in TV? It's because when the move from analog to digital occurred, the level difference between commercials and programs was extreme. And so there was an FCC report in order, it's Report in Order 1182, that outlined the basics of the COM Act. And I you can read this while I speak, or you don't even have to pay that much attention to it. But it basically defined here is a meter that has been worked on, which is called an LKFS meter. It's not an average meter, not a VU meter, not a peak meter. It is a specific meter that is designed to give you a model of how people hear loudness. So it is a loudness meter. And it was specifically created, the COM Act, to prevent digital television commercial advertisements from being transmitted louder than the programs that they accompany. That's
Hmm.
what that's what this whole thing was about. So in TV, there is a proper level, and that proper level is defined by rules in the COM Act. So over the course of a program, whether it's a 5-second promo, a 15-second commercial, a 2-hour movie, across those programs, you have to maintain a average level plus or minus 2 dB across the entire period, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 2 hours the average has to be within that model, within a certain amount, within a given LKFS meter reading. You get to determine what that meter reading is, and there's rules for that. But essentially, every television station over the air sends a number to the receiver, and that receiver uses that number to determine what to do with loudness. And then the broadcaster just continues to broadcast, and they have to hold the averages within 2 dB of the number that they tell the TV that they're sending. Hope
Really?
that makes a little bit of sense.
That sounds a little complex. I'll tell you what, let's.
You want to unpack that a little bit? I will tell you.
Yeah, I do. But I tell you what, we've got to take a quick break for our friends at Broadcast Bionics.
Please.
And
we need to support the people that support the show.
Exactly. Hey, Broadcast Bionics is one of our sponsors, and in fact, Dan McQuillan is going to be a guest on this show in the next couple of weeks or so. And so let's hear from Bionics. If you're a broadcast engineer, you bring this to your management and your on-air teams, and they're going to love you. Check it out from Bionics.
Welcome to the Bionic Studio. The Bionic Studio brings all audience interaction to the fingertips of a production team in radio, TV, and podcast. Our workflow-led system is working 24/7 around the world for small broadcasters and national and international networks. Our telephony module, Bionic Talk Show, allows cost-effective centralization, remote operation, scalability, and resilience across an entire network of stations, but at the same time is used in single-studio self-op environments. Social media curation and activity is now considered a broadcast-critical part of programming. Bionic Social means the studio isn't overwhelmed with a wall of interaction from an ever-growing number of social platforms. We combine SMS, MMS, and email together with a speech-to-text service for listeners using smart speakers. We enable studio teams to curate, filter, and display all platforms in one place, and post text, images, and video content to multiple platforms in one operation. Effortless collection of video content with Bionic Director has helped position some of the world's most successful stations as leaders in viral content, generating appointments to listen and free marketing via retweets and shares. Bionic Contest enables end-to-end tracking of on-air competitions, live reads, and prizes. These could be on-air contests, automated SMS entry, or online. Anywhere, and Skype TX for Radio brings high-quality audio and video contribution into the studio with ease. No need for dedicated PCs to run different applications. Everything is controlled within the Bionic Studio UI, and incoming connections are visible to users along with all other platforms. Our codec integration enables connection, algorithm configuration, and directory to a wide range of IP and ISDN codecs. The Bionic Studio, a unique suite of products designed to enable your talent to work smarter.
Broadcast Bionics and the Bionic Studio. You ought to check that out. It's amazing stuff. At bionics.co.uk or bionic.radio. Either one will get you there. And you'll be a hero with your on-air talent because it lets you really produce lots of social media content and for doing almost no extra work. Thanks a lot to Broadcast Bionics for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. I'm Kirk Harnack in the Telos Alliance studio in Nashville, Tennessee. Ken Tankel is my guest, and we're radio engineers, but so is Ken. Ken dealt with loudness in a big major market, and but he's here to explain TV audio, and loudness ain't the goal. Correct loudness is, and getting the dialogue right, or at least better, is what we're talking about too. Ken, let's get back to you.
Yes. So I don't, unless you want to go down the path of explaining what dial norm is, that's the data that a broadcaster sends to every TV set-top box, over-the-top box, everything that is sent by an over-the-air broadcaster, every forum that goes to the home via RF arrives with a dial norm setting, which tells the receiver essentially where to set the internal level, the level before it gets to your volume control. And the object of that is if you change channels and you go from an NPR station to say one of the networks, if NPR chooses to produce all of their content at a lower level than one of the networks chooses to produce all their content, when you change the channel, you would expect to get this change in levels where NPR is softer than a particular network show. What this dial norm does is it allows NPR to say, this is our average level. And there's a promise in that part of the COM Act, which says, I will not deviate from that average level by more than 2 dB. And another broadcaster can say, well, my level normally set is 6 dB hotter than their level, but I won't deviate from that by more than plus or minus 2 dB. And here's my level setting. And in your receiver literally, when you change to that network, it drops the level just before it gets to your volume control. So program to program, the levels are kept just about the same. If any of this is interesting as a technology, I think that's a whole other show. But
Yeah.
that's what's happening.
Cool. Okay, so there's this thing called dial norm. TV station sends
Yep.
it, and they are supposed to tell the receiver, the consumer's receiver, here's how loud I'm sending, and the broadcaster is supposed to stay within 2 dB of that over time, over a loudness measurement over some period of integration time.
Right. And so this new meter called an LKFS meter that is loudness K scale relative to full scale digital LKFS in Europe and Latin America. Some places in Asia they have another name for the meter, but the measurements of the meter are exactly the same. So there's there's LUFS, which is loudness unit relative to full scale, and there's LK loudness K scale. But essentially, it is not essentially. Mathematically, it is exactly the same measurement. And
okay, that's good to know. So because I read both, LUFS and LKFS are the same thing.
Precisely the same thing. Precisely the same mathematics.
Okay.
Precisely the same definition. Just if you're interested, LUFS, that's defined by an entire European Union broadcast set of definitions about how things will be named. And in the US, it was, hey, we have this new meter and it's called LKFS, and everybody just simply accepted that. No rules involved with coming up with a name. Could have been the Kirk meter if you had invented it.
Okay.
So
all right.
We have this new metering standard. This metering standard applies filtering to audio. It measures the audio over time, so it takes lots of measurements over time. It integrates those measurements, and it comes up with a model of how people hear, so that with a great degree of confidence, if you play different programs to somebody, music program, a talk-only program, an effects-laden show, if you play those at the same level indicated on an LKFS meter, 95 out of 100 people, 9,500 out of 10,000 people will tell you that those things are at the same level. Something which anybody who has mixed music, or for that matter, mixed radio shows, knows is just because the VU meter is at the same place doesn't mean the loudness sounds the same. VU meters were invented to protect equipment, not to give you an idea of how the human ear hears. A VU meter corresponds to average power, which is really important to know when you use tubes to send things down transmission lines. It may be interesting for this audience to know that the peak meter, program peak, PPM, was invented before the VU meter was invented. And again, the peak program meter is just another way of looking at program and another way of knowing whether you were exceeding the capability of the electronics that you were driving. LKFS, nobody's concerned with the electronic part of it anymore, because you can hear the distortion if you're distorting, but now you have a digital signal the digital signal has a maximum full scale. As many bits as you're using, all those bits are ones, and it's as loud as you can get. And then somewhere below that is a noise floor. So we've gone from operating at, again, broad brushstroke, we're operating at about +4 dBm or dBV, if you prefer that, coming out of an analog console when the VU meter was at 0 and you have headroom. If you had very expensive analog gear, that could be 20 dB of headroom. If you didn't have very expensive gear, that could be perhaps 12 dB of headroom. And again, going the other way, you could have a noise floor that was as good as 75, 76 dB, practically speaking. Or you could have gear that barely made 60 dB below 0 as a level, or in some cases only 48 dB below. And so I started to graph this a long time ago for talking to people about what this stuff looked like. And here, see if I can go back a little bit on this, give you an idea. So here we have essentially analog delivery. I've created an analog meter, which in this case goes all the way up to +24. That's what typically very good recording studio equipment could manage as an output, and some radio gear. When we get down to about -48, in terms of analog, we're now at 72 dB of dynamic range from -48 to +24. That's pretty good dynamic range for analog equipment. And what I'm showing here is the peaks are in yellow. The average that you're targeting is in a nice light green, and the darker green are all the levels below what we're targeting with our VU meter. And your VU meter might have been right around 0. Maybe for 0 VU, it could have been up at +8 VU 0, but essentially your averages were right in that space, and then wherever your peaks were above that. If we look at loud commercials were produced with a lot of compression. So your average level on a commercial and its peak, so that there was very little peak left. You could produce commercials with about 6 dB of average to peak ratio. So once you got an average, your limit, and I mean limit as in limiter, your limiter was set about 6 dB hotter. And with broadcast processors, those broadcast processors, they worked really hard to keep your output within a certain range of values. So I took these thoughts and I added an FM modulation meter to it. So if I assume that the maximum output you're capable of is 100% modulation, 6 dB below that, right? Half is 50% modulation. 25% below that, another halving again, yeah, it's a 12 dB dynamic range. When we get from 25% down to 6% modulation, look at how small in terms of a dynamic range in dB that represents. And let's go all the way down to -60 dB to 1/10 of 1% modulation. So how often do radio stations want to be modulating at 1/10 of 1%? And the answer to that is you don't want to be doing that at all. So from -36 to +24 is 60 dB. So that 60 dB right here, that was the required capability of your transmission chain, is to just be able to maintain this. But on the radio, we wanted to really stick up here. We wanted to be able to get 50% modulation all the time. Now, with modern processors, my guess is that a music station has the capability of keeping their averages close to 80% all the time. Absolutely.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Sure.
We'll just pause right here, and in the finished version.
I assume this gets edited from the final release.
It does. It does. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks everybody out in the world for sticking with us.
Yeah, that's a good question. Are we still on the stream live? Okay, good deal. Good deal. Hey, everybody in the stream. We're Ken will now
Yeah,
perform a dance number for you while we clean up some disk space. And actually, hey, Ken, we're gonna need to break in the next. Well, once you get restarted, we'll need to find a good spot to break within a couple of minutes.
sure. Because I'm going to jump. How about after the next slide? We'll just jump
Well,
to the next
yeah.
slide.
Okay.
Is this making some sense? I hope the people out there
Yeah.
were listening.
The one thing that I still have a problem with is, okay, we're good.
We're good to go.
I'm going to let you continue. I'm not going to bring up a thing I have a problem with. We can talk
Okay.
about that some
Well,
other
we
time.
can. Okay. So let's. Can we bring that slide back?
So I'll count us back in, and we'll see if we can get it edited at a good spot. So we'll restart here. Hi, everybody in the network. Glad you hang with us. We'll restart here in 3, 2. All right, Ken, I think I'm with you so far. Finish up with my understanding of this slide right here.
Okay. So what this is intended to do is what it did for me, is to give you a view of what FM modulation is compared to what the levels are that you're producing content at. What exactly it means on the radio to have an average level of 50%, which these days I think is low, and have your peak levels only 6 dB hotter, because that's where your limiter goes into hard limiting, actually clipping, because you're not going to go over 100% modulation. Given that could be 105% or 110% on peaks, depending on what kind of SCAs you may be broadcasting. This is, again, that broad brushstroke, which shows you that most of the time in radio, we are trying to hold that production so that our voices, the content you want people to hear, is right in there at that 50% or better mark. When you do a mix of your voice on top of music, you're dropping that music down so that your voice can take over the power in that spot. So remember that. We're going to jump. Here's a study that was done. This was in cooperation with the Dolby Corporation and at least one university that I'm aware of, though this testing was done in a number of places. Imagine being invited to sit down in a room in front of a TV set. You are given a newscast or other program, you're given a volume control, and you're told to set the volume control where it's comfortable. And you do that. And you're now presented with TV programs with audio at various levels. And you have a pad in front of you. And on that pad, you can check off annoying, I'm ready to turn it down. I realize that's louder, but it's okay. I realize that's softer, but it's okay. I really would like it louder, and I'm really annoyed because I can't hear it. That's what you were asked to do. This study was done with 95% confidence intervals. In other words, they tested enough people to know that what I'm showing on this slide is true for 95% of people who watch TV, at least 95% of the people who were in these focus groups. And there are a couple of things that are really interesting here. Look at 0, which is where people said they were comfortable, and look at where people said they wanted to turn it down. Just about 6 dB louder.
Okay.
And let's go the other way. We can go down from +2, right, to -5, 7, 8 dB, and people say, that's softer, but that's okay. But at 10 dB down, now, if you are a student of SPL and psychoacoustics, and the way people react to sound, you would say when the level drops by 10 dB, it's half as loud. So at half as loud as where people set it for their own comfort level, they already want to turn it up. When it's twice as loud, they're already annoyed. And when it gets down here, 17 dB, people are completely annoyed. And let's lay our modulation meter on top of that. 6 dB up, 100% modulation, that's where people's limit are. 50% modulation is where people are comfortable. At 25% modulation, okay, it's softer, but people will bear it. When you get down to 6%, you're down to where people are annoyed by it. So
right, and I just want to point out
whether
that you're laying the modulation levels out there, just so we can have an idea here, because the thing that measures modulation is a completely different algorithm than the thing that measures loudness, right?
yes, but
Okay.
we're now not. I'm not trying to compare the modulation measurement to a VU measurement. What I'm trying to show here is that for 70 or more years, we've been broadcasting. In those 70 or more years, there has always been the concept of 100%, the maximum modulation.
Yeah.
It's always been right. 100%'s always been twice as high as 50%. If we start to go back to the days of what were the CBS labs, a Volumax and an Audimax, which may have been the first widely manufactured processors, we were trying to hold our modulation in that 6 dB range. That 6 dB range does actually compare to exactly what you see on a VU meter. And in terms of LKFS, now what's that 6 dB in VU versus that 6 dB in LKFS? Well, it's not precisely the same, but it's a really interesting relative measure. It's not clear to me whether we have trained humanity to be comfortable in this 25% to 100% range, or if this is just the way humans are comfortable and our broadcasting has matched that because that's physics and we all live in the same physical world. But I think this is a fascinating comparison. It also is a key to why there's a problem on television.
Okay.
And we can go to the next slide here, and it's up to you. If we want to take a break here, we can, or we can spend a minute or 2 or 3 on this slide. What's your call, Kirk?
Spend a couple minutes on this slide. I'm really intrigued and want to continue with this, and then we'll take a break.
Great. So here's production and delivery that's done on a digital scale, where 0 dB represents full scale, as many bits, a 14-bit, 16-bit, 24-bit signal. When it's all ones, it's as loud as it can be. And then all the levels are below that. So at minus 24 dB, that's the same thing as saying that's my 0 point. In analog, this would have been my 0 VU on a console that could do plus 24. This range that we see in here is the range we produce around. In other words, if we were producing because our analog console didn't have a lot of headroom, perhaps we had normal levels that were as much as minus 8, 9, 10 dB below 0. Maybe we had a noise floor problem. We were producing at plus 8 or so. But that green indicates the range where we're putting the majority of the content that we want to be the main audio content. But let's compare that to how commercials are produced. Commercials are produced with that 6 dB signal to noise. And commercials are produced that way without regard to whether it was digital production or analog production, and without regard to whether it was for television or for radio or what. This is just how you make commercials loud. Now, look what happens when we went to digital broadcasting and television. We went to the capability of TV stations to use minus 24, give or take a few dB, use minus 24 as their 0 point. And they started to mix dialogue and other content at minus 24. They being TV stations, never applied more processing than they needed to control their transmitters. And now with 24 dB of headroom to the home, they could process very little or not at all. Not only that, but as you went to digital, TV stations were looking at noise floors, 72 dB. That's if your audio equipment was not top notch. 16-bit signal, you're down in the hundreds. I mean, practically speaking, with good digital production, you have a noise floor that's 96 dB below 0 dB full scale.
Okay.
Quiet room, good microphones, good preamps, good production technique. Pardon me. Theoretically, noise floor of a 24-bit signal is 144 dB.
So this is really good for noise floor, but as we saw in some previous slides, the comfort range is pretty small. We want to be able to peek over that, and we want to have a noise floor that's way, way below that so we don't hear noise. But even though we have this huge dynamic range available, we still want to keep it within an acceptable level for those people watching at home, right?
Okay. And here's the step that's missed in television production. Okay. In radio production, no one's paying attention to this. They don't have to. We are still compressing to that range to feed an FM transmitter and to keep our ubiquity. I'll just use that name in Europe or Latin America. It could be one of another digital formats, but we're using the same processing because we want the sound to be the same. You don't want somebody to go to your ubiquity station and it sounds like a completely different station than it sounds like on your FM.
Yeah, you speaking of the HD1. So you the FM, and when it switches to HD1, you want a similar texture to the sound.
Exactly. Going all the way back to what I said at the very beginning, you want the signature. You want the signature of your radio station. Radio people, there's no need to do this. There's no COMAC. You have a medium which says this is 100%. You can't go past that because now you're going to interfere with people. I mean, it really is a disaster when you're splattering all over the dial. Your digital follows that, even though your digital has much wider dynamic range. You're capable of a much wider dynamic range on your ubiquity feed, but you want it to sound like your FM feed, and so you process it similarly. Now we go to TV. All the bandwidth in the world. TV people don't like processing to begin with. They're not trying for loudness. They never were. They were just trying to fit it into the FM spectrum. So guess what? Let's go on the air with nothing. We got 24 dB of headroom. We got a noise floor that is infinite. We have a noise floor that can go down to 100. We can just give it. Now, let's take this commercial. And now, folks, let's go to the used car lot. Not to pick on used car ads.
Yeah.
And now let's have something that's produced with 6 or 8 dB of peak to average ratio. And what happens? Well, what happens is my normal voice and my normal speaking voice, delivering the news and having a conversation, being in a film, is way down here. And the commercials, everybody, are way up here. And you know what? I can deliver that now. I can put commercials in your home that are 10 dB hotter on average.
So we're going to take a break. To me, and in our last segment, which won't be very long, by the way, in our last segment, I'm going to need you to tell us, what we can do about this, if anything.
Yes,
because in radio, we don't have conflicting goals with commercial versus music and talk. With TV, we have conflicting goals. The advertiser wants to be loud and get to you, and the program producers want their program to sound natural and nice and like they intend.
Well, what doesn't change is advertisers want to be heard, and they'll use every technique to do it.
Yeah,
but the people at home have a different goal. Their goal is, I don't want to be blasted and be changing my volume all the time. Yeah. I want these things to be relatively the same. And so, in the last segment, I'll give you a visual on what's going on.
Let's talk about Broadcast Tools and Broadcaster's General Store. You can get Broadcast Tools, the whole line, from Broadcaster's General Store. And I'll tell you more about BGS in a second. Let's look at Broadcast Tools. They have, every time I go to their webpage, it seems like there's more ways to solve problems at Broadcast Tools. Their website is broadcasttools.com, of course. And their slogan here is problem solved. And it certainly is. Look, just scroll down the enormous front page of all the tools that they make at Broadcast Tools. Don Wingett makes to help you solve problems. Whether your problem is large or small, routing, or silence sensing, switching based on automatic stuff. You have your AES distribution amplifiers, your AES digital switchers and silence sensors. You've got a universal silence sensor and switcher, analog distribution amplifiers, little ones, bigger ones, that stuff that'll fit under a cabinet or in a rack space. Analog matrix switchers. These have been so popular for a couple of decades now, and they're just awesome. Analog switchers and silence detectors, analog to digital and digital to analog converters. Really good stuff that does an accurate job of converting one to the other or the other to one. Breakout panels. These are just such problem solvers. If you want to have ways to break things out to get XLR connectors in and out, or RJ45 connectors, DTMF encoders and decoders. Hey, you're still running a network. You're running maybe a regional network and you want to use DTMF to queue your people down the line. You can do that. GPIO interfaces are available to plug into your computer to get contact closures in and out of a computer. Oh my goodness, headphone amps, and these are good. Mixers, you have little mixers if you need a little utility mixer, no problem. They've got it for you. Passive switchers, analog and AES. There was no active electronics in the path. It just switches by relay switching. Remote controls, yep, they got that at Broadcast Tools. And these great satellite connector adapters. I'm going to be wiring up that new Westwood One satellite receiver here in about a week and a half at my stations in Mississippi. And man, I'm going to put these to use. These connectors that go on the back that break out from the D sub connector, sometimes a huge one, to pins that you can actually fit a wire into and screw it down. Because usually you only have to connect 3, 4, 5, 8 wires on a given huge, GPIO D sub connector. Well, this makes it a whole lot easier for you. Silence detectors, telephone hybrids, and accessories like accessory panels to mount things, including some rack space adapters. Just so much stuff from Broadcast Tools that really will make your job easier. You ought to at least get familiar with their product line. So the next time you've got a problem to solve, go to these problem solvers at Broadcast Tools. And of course, the place to get them all is from Broadcasters General Store. BGS for short. You can give them a call because they're set up to take your call, talk to you on the phone, help you solve your problem, give you a price quote, get that sharp pencil out and get you a low price and tell you when it's going to be there. Call them at 352-622-7700. That's 352-622-7700 for Broadcasters General Store. Thanks a lot, Broadcast Tools and BGS, for sponsoring This Week in Radio Tech. All right, Ken Tankel's my guest. This could be a 3-hour show, Ken. There's so much to learn and talk about here, but let's pick up where we left off.
We're gonna come to the thrilling conclusion.
Okay. All right. Go right ahead.
So I mean, I hope people like the visuals. I just decided I would map this comfort zone to give you an idea of what's going on in TV sound. Basically, what TV processors do, what the linear acoustic processors do, company I work for, part of the Telos Alliance, one of the brands there, is we leave the product, we leave the envelope intact, and we move that envelope down to whatever the target value is that the broadcaster specifies. So this is minus 24 dB LKFS. So again, it's a measurement of the psychoacoustic level. So programs are produced, they're targeted at this minus 24 dB for this imaginary station. We take the commercials and we bring their level down, and you can see in the comfort zone, what we're trying to do is to match people's comfort at home with a realistic range of levels. Now, one thing you have to know is that peak levels, audio peak levels, contribute nothing to the value of the LKFS measurement. So if you have content that's very peaky, whether that is music or it's effects or it's some background noise from PCs or things falling or whatever, if we're talking about peaks, it does not contribute to this at all. So in TV, you can still get that full 24 dB. So an orchestra typically is 17 dB from the Canon shot. in the 1612 overture down to the quiet triangle hit that's in that overture, that peak to average ratio is going to be under 24 dB. 24 dB is an enormous peak to average ratio, and that truly exists from the broadcaster into the home. Whether it exists in the TV amplifier, again, an entire other show to talk about consumer electronics. And I just laid the comfort zone in there to give you an idea of where that is. Now, here's a commercial. This is the audio from the TV commercial. The green line represents what the broadcaster tells all of their content producers, whether you're producing commercials or promos or you're producing movies, the network, the station, typically the network, has got audio standards. And they want to see the average on that green line. Each of these dots represents the progressive measurement of LKFS. So I start the LKFS meter running when the commercial starts here, and I stop the meter here, but every couple of seconds I post a dot for where that level is at that point in time. And so what you can see is the average is going to be really, really close to minus 18 when the requested target is minus 24, about 6 dB hot on average. And this next slide will show you what a linear acoustic processor does with that. A linear acoustic processor immediately, by the slope, by the change in here, recognizes that the levels are high and shooting higher, and so it reduces the overall gain. And we can go back and forth, and you can see the shape is not exactly the same, but the processor quickly adapts to what's going on and tries to pull that average to minus 24. Let's go now to a movie segment. This is 240, 250, 300 or so, around 5 minutes of a movie. This is the target level. Once again, the green line at minus 24, and you can see the measurements over 5 minutes of where the LKFS measurements lie. And what this shows you is that this movie is very, very low in level. This movie got delivered to the TV station and broadcast, and this is an unprocessed output of what was fed into the transmission chain of what that looks like. Now, I can show you what that looks like again if we find the average in it. Now, this is actually pre-processed, and this is post-processed. Post-processed, you can see that due to the peak levels and things, that after processing, our average is very, very close to minus 24, but look at how much of that program is well below minus 24. And I can tell you, because I know exactly what movie and what scene this is that everything above the line and near the line is from the effects channel. There are gunshots and explosions and things hitting the floor, and all of the dialogue is down here. Very, 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 very low in level. This is how you can create programming which meets the requirement that the average levels across the program are minus 24, but you can't hear the dialogue because the dialogue is so low by comparison.
Okay.
Now, what most people don't know is that movie studios, when they create a movie for theater release, that movie soundtrack goes to goes through a file-based process which conforms the soundtrack to the requirements of broadcasters all over the world. It is typical to have 10 different soundtracks for the same movie to meet the requirements of American, or I'll say North American broadcast, Latin American broadcast, European broadcast, Asian broadcast for over the top, like the Netflix and Amazon Primes and Hulu's. All of these different delivery mechanisms have different standards that they want met. And a movie studio is making up to a dozen. 10 is really typical. A dozen is very high. 6 is very lucky. but also will represent a movie that's not expected to be in wide distribution. This is what happens. The people who actually make Hollywood movies, they spend the money to take that soundtrack and do what we call confirmation. They conform the audio to the restrictions of the medium it goes to. Now, with the availability of all of these over-the-top delivery mechanisms, we have Netflix producing movies, we have Amazon producing movies, we have all of these small production companies, small compared to Warner Brothers, compared to the MGM, compared to the people that we've known for the past 100 years to be making films. We have all these new people coming in. They want to be part of Hollywood because it's so exciting. They are producing content in mix rooms, in theater mix rooms. This stuff that you're seeing on made-for-TV movies that never go to a theater, those things are being mixed in mixed theaters, the way Hollywood is being mixed. But they're not necessarily being conformed. And so they're being created in an environment with an extremely powerful center channel with the dialogue in it. They're being created in 5.1, if not 5.1.4, and now Dolby Atmos with up to 128 channels. They're mixing these in an environment where the dialogue is extremely clear. And then without any confirmation, they're putting that on TV and sending it out of your 65-inch TV that's 1 inch thick and has two 20-watt amplifiers in it. And guess what? You're not hearing the dialogue. A lot of the production is being created by people who do not take the time. One man's opinion, though I am intimately involved in a lot of this stuff, given that our clients bring to me issues with their content, and I often find myself talking between the program creators, the audio people, and the network people, trying to figure out how to make these two things match for the viewers at home. This is a problem. A large part of it is not recognizing the medium you're producing for, and therefore not putting dialogue in the correct amplitude relationship to the rest of your production. The Hollywood people can certainly tell you that you can do both. You can have an exciting, grand, great movie that translates incredibly well to the small screen. But you have to understand that mechanism. And it's not widely understood. Just like getting someone who doesn't know radio to come in and try and process an FM radio music station to make a program director happy, if you don't understand the delivery, you're going to make mistakes. And that, in fact, is where some of the mistakes come from, and the difficulty.
Ken, I've got the whole solution. Now you're going to have you're going to have some ideas right after this last break. You'll have about a minute, maybe two, to sum this up, give your solution. But I've got your solution right here. It's the same thing that we did for the radio business in the 1970s. We bought everybody a pair of RLux speakers and set them on top of the console. Here, make sure it sounds good through these crappy little speakers. And if it does, you're okay.
Yep. I had my Oratone 5Cs for years and years and
Oratone,
years.
that's it. That's the word. That's the word. Oratone. I'm going to put a link to Oratone in the show notes because remember, I built so many control rooms and the PD said, now we got to have those little speakers in there too, because we got to check and make sure the mix sounds good on these little speakers.
I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who have produced a movie. And when I say, have you listened to that on a 35-inch, 45-inch, 55-inch, 65-inch TV with the TV speakers? And the answer is no. The people who've produced the content have never listened to it on a TV.
By the way, even better, what they need is one of those speakers that's in a metal case that you hang on your window.
That's right. Well,
remember, it had the wire going over to the post next to your car.
If you're not listening to a sound bar let alone a home theater system, instead of what's built into your TV. You have no idea how good the audio on TV is. Sports broadcasts from all the majors, sports broadcasts listened to on a 5.1 theater system, home theater. Oh my God, they're all doing a great job.
Yep. Hey, we'll take this quick break, and Ken will be back with some final thoughts this week in Radio Tech with Ken Tankel, our guest. We could go on for hours, and we need to have Ken back again. It's a wealth of information. We're brought to you in part by Angry Audio and their newest product. It's not even on the website yet, the USB analog audio gizmo. The more I look at this, the more I realize the engineering that's gone into this. I mean, little convenience things. Look, it comes with little rubber feet right here on the case. That means you can take this sucker and screw it in somewhere, like under the console, in the furniture, and it won't sit there and rattle, because it's got the little rubber feet. So it'll screw right in, and it'll stay right there. And look at the connectors here. We have two RJ45 connectors. That's for the analog audio. And look what comes in the box. The adapters to, if you want to use them. Now, of course, if you're going to just run a long Cat5 cable over to, some device, that's fine. But they even come with the Studio Hub style adapters from RJ45 to XLR, male and female. And then there's also here the USB connector. This style, what is that called? A D? Whatever that style is called. We used to call it a printer connector. But it even comes with the cable for that, to hook that up to your workstation, your computer, your laptop, whatever you need. And what makes this USB analog audio gizmo different and better than just about anything else on the market is the computer ground and the analog ground are separate. And that means you don't get the hum, buzz, and whine that you often get with other USB adapters. I've had that problem right here in this studio where I work. I've had three different USB external adapters, and each of them have given me whine when I hook them up to my monitor speakers in here. So I'm going to, try this sucker out and see if we get all cleaned up. But this will be amazing for you, for your radio station, for your home studio. It's really high quality audio. Some of the best technology in there for the USB chip and for the analog converters, A to D and D to A converters. The USB analog audio gizmo from our friends at Angry Audio. There's the website, angryaudio.com. You need to check it out. They make some nice stuff everywhere I go. People say good. I was just with Bill Jackson Sunday afternoon over at K-Love, and he was going on and on about how he loves his Angry Audio gear. Hey, This Week in Radio Tech is also brought to you by Max Connect Wireless. Here's a testimonial.
With all of the recent cybersecurity attacks against large corporations, we were looking for a product that would give us the ultimate security at our transmitter sites and as well as with our broadcast equipment. Max Connect fits the bill very well. Its greatest security feature is the fact that it gives you a single static IP address. Using this single static IP address allows us to close hundreds of open ports on our firewalls across the company and restrict access to only the Max Connect IPs. This has greatly reduced our exposure to the World Wide Web and made us much more secure moving forward. It has also given us the ability to expand as needed in a secure fashion.
And John Takak should know, here's one of them right here. I used this very one in Memphis, Tennessee, about 2 months ago. There was an outage, a big outage, because lightning struck and knocked out a bunch of internet connection for WEVL, and we got right back on there. They use the micro MPX technology to get from downtown Memphis out to their transmitter site way out in East Memphis, actually in Germantown, Tennessee. And this picked up the signal just fine. We just sent it to the fixed IP address of this guy, and they were on the air for their fundraiser. Max Connect Wireless. It's cool. It works. You should try it out too. Good stuff. And it's available on SIM cards from any of these carriers, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, whatever's good for you. Thanks a lot. Max Connect. We'll put the link in the show notes so you can it's spelled funny. 2 X's and a K. Max Connect Wireless. All right, we're here for just a couple more minutes with Ken Tankel. Ken, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
The final thoughts. That USB connector is a Type B USB connector.
Thanks. Okay.
Yeah. So final thoughts on this. Everybody's trying as hard as they can The amount of content that's available is so huge compared to just 10 years ago. This is not a matter of people not paying attention or not wanting to do the right thing. This is a matter of being in a complex world and needing to recognize what the requirements are to meet an audience's expectations. And it's not as easy as it used to be. There are so many alternatives now that simply getting it on the radio is just not enough. And I think that all the radio people certainly have a recognition of how much work is going into protect the networks from intrusion, to gain access to everything, to keep up with what's available in processing, to balance what's required between their digital distribution, whether that's on the web, in podcasts, in Ubiquity, and digital formats, and what it is to the FM transmitter. But when there are issues, there's no way I can stress this enough. You're just going to have to take my word for it. So few people take the time to figure out how to call HBO, ABC, NBC, CBS. So few people make the effort, and it's a big effort to figure out how to pick up the phone and dial their local station or dial the big network, that there's very little feedback. And the feedback that those networks and stations get means an enormous amount to them. The problem solving that goes into something that the public has made them aware of, the networks and the stations realize how hard they are to contact. And when somebody makes that effort to report something like missing center channels or bad bass on broadcasts, or dialogue that you can't hear, that it changes the way things are done. And so call. If you're an audio professional and you hear stuff that you don't think is professional audio delivered by professionals, call, make the effort, because it really makes change. It really, really does. The calls that are absolutely paid attention to.
I sure see a lot of complaining on Facebook groups after a major television event like the Emmys or football or a parade, where the audio might have been messed up for some people. And I think you said the smartest thing. It's a complex world. There's more and more and more distribution channels, and it's tough to actually think about every place where this is going. Maybe in the future things will get simple. It's right back to my usual line. It's the beauty of standards, Ken. There are so many of them.
So you can pick the one you like.
That's pick one. Or
really
except in this case, you got to pick 12 if you want to hit everybody.
Yeah. Well, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ken,
sorry,
thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been fun. I love talking with you.
It has. Love it too. And I always learn a lot. So stay close and we'll have you back on again. All right.
Everybody have a good evening.
Ken Tankel, Field Applications Engineer at TELUS Alliance. And of course, Ken's employer, my employer, we make products for the television industry to solve a lot of these problems, whether it's file-based or real-time. So that's the world that Ken lives in every day. We'll put links in the show notes to that kind of stuff. All right. Thanks for joining us. Big thanks to Suncast for producing today's show. Really appreciate you. Thanks to Andrew Zarian, the founder of the GFQ Network, where you'll find this and other fine podcasts. And we'll see you next week on This Week in Radio Tech.